What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel and welcome to some more conference championship preview and predictions. We are rounding out the other two games that I haven't done yet. And let's start out with this one right here. Ford Field is the destination of the Mid-American Conference Championship. And through all the maction and all the chaos, these are the two teams that were left on the other side. Miami, Ohio is going to look to become the first back-to-back MAC champions, and I believe almost a decade, if not a little bit over, and the Ohio Bobcats, to the surprise of some, made this position and are looking to take it away from in-state competition and get back on top of the Mid-American Conference. We'll tell you everything you need to know about the Bobcats and the Red Hawks here in just a little bit. But before we do that, you guys know I got to say thank you for all the love and support this channel has received, continue to receive, everything of the sort. If you'd like to support the channel, the two biggest ways you can do so are subscribing and ringing the bell so you don't miss an upload, and you especially should do so if you are as big of a college football nerd as I am. And you can also just simply kick back, relax, and watch this video, and that's going to help to support me as well. Liking, commenting, sharing, any other way to interact with the channel also helps, and you can give me a follow on any social medias if you want to support me outside of YouTube. That's at TailgateNate29. Be happy to connect with any of you fine people out there. But without further ado, now, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about some Maction. And Maction, at least conference play, is going to be rounded out here this Saturday in Ford Field. Always a fun one when you watch the MAC Championship. It's Ohio. It's Miami, Ohio. And this should be a really, really fun one. These are two teams that have already played this year, and we'll tell you about that matchup in just a little bit. Hey, how do we do preview predictions on the channel? Well, I'm glad you asked. We're going to go through some keys to the game when each team possesses the football. So we're first going to look at this Ohio offense against this Miami defense, and then we'll flip it. We'll take a look at the Red Hawk offense against the Bobcat defense. At the end of the video, give you some final keys, break this one down a little bit more, and tell you who I think is going to win the MAC championship, again, from Ford Field in Detroit, Michigan. Before we dive on into breaking down these two teams did already play earlier this year, a 30-20 win for Miami, Ohio. This game happened all the way back on October 19th. That was in Yager Stadium in Oxford, Ohio. And when you break down the statistics here of that game, give me 1 second because being a little funky with me right now. But when you break down the statistics of that game, really, Miami, Ohio, there were some things they did really well, but there were some things Ohio did really well in that game. Also, Ohio was 8 of 16 on third down. They weren't penalized. They controlled the clock. The passing game was working. The run game was fairly effective in that contest as well. But Miami, great job on their defense. They forced 2 turnovers, only allowed Ohio to get 3.3 yards per carry. What I meant to say earlier was the Bobcats were able to rip off some big runs, but Miami did a pretty good job at halting the run game in its entirety. Now, Miami was only 2 of 10 on third down there in that game, but it was those 2 turnovers that were crucial for the Red Hawks being able to come away with that 30-20 win, as I mentioned earlier. So, okay, let me introduce you to both of these teams. Let's first talk about the Ohio Bobcat offense. This was a Bobcat team coming into this year that had lost a ton of pieces, especially through the transfer portal. Rourke, who obviously is now at Indiana, the quarterback from last year, there was a guy that needed to step in and take over that role. There were a lot of guys that were leaving the wide receiver room, especially I think the top 2 leading rushers on this team, and Allison and Bangura both left, and a lot of other pieces were being needed to replace on this team, and they have had an absolutely phenomenal season. Offensively, Parker Navarro, who you saw on the screen just a little bit ago, has taken over that quarterback position, and while this stat line isn't going to wow you, he's played pretty well for this team. 1,934 yards and 10 touchdowns on the season. However, those 10 touchdowns have come with 10 interceptions. So Parker Navarro looking to cut back on the interceptions here in this MAC championship. You go back and you want to talk about the game that these two teams played. I believe both of those turnovers, both of those turnovers were interceptions thrown by Parker Navarro. And then you saw Nick Paulos, hopefully I'm saying that last name correctly, come into the game against Miami all the way back on October 19th. But Parker Navarro's done a great job at quarterback for the most part. This is the team, though, that is led by this backfield. Yes, you lost Bangura and Allison from last year, but Anthony Tyus, I believe a former Northwestern transfer, if I am not mistaken, almost has 1,000 yards this year, 184 carries, 960 yards, 8 touchdowns, right around 5 yards per carry. There's another guy back there averaging just 6 yards per carry and you've already heard me say his name. That is the quarterback, Parker Navarro. Yes, he can throw the ball. He's got some talented wide receivers, including a guy that's got over 1,000 yards this year, and Coleman Owen, the senior, has been lights out for the Bobcats and has been the main target out of the wide receiver room. But Parker Navarro can get outside and run, and then with Anthony Tyus there to the side of one of his hips, being able to take a lot of the load here off of this offense. And that is what this offense is built off of, is their run game. Now, Miami, Ohio, what is their defense built off of? Their defense is built off of just overall toughness. You take a look at some of the players that Miami possesses. I mean, there is some world-class defensive talent. Coming into the year, they probably had one of the best linebacking duos in the country in Matt Salopek and Ty Wise, and both of those guys have performed beautifully this year. They have two defensive backs that have at least 10 passes defended this season. The secondary has forced 52 passes defended, 27 between the two defensive backs that I mentioned there just a little bit ago, and Walters as well as Strader. Both of those guys have been fantastic. 11 interceptions for this defense as well. They've also recovered 8 fumbles. This is a defense that just does everything right. They, besides the third downs, and that was evident the last time these two teams played, the third down defense for the Redhawks was overall not that great, but they defend the run really, really well. You see, they're only 128 rushing yards per game allowed. The secondary only allows 180 passing yards per game. This is the defense as a whole that doesn't really allow teams to move the ball that great. They're able to get quite a fair bit of pressure. Matt Salopek, who is their leading tackler, 106 tackles, is not a guy that's going to get home to the quarterback a lot. He's just a linebacker that can fly all over the field. We'll talk more about that later, but you got guys on the defensive front like Ugwu, Wise, the linebacker I mentioned earlier, can get back to the quarterback. Corey Suttle is a great pass rusher, as well as Trick, who's another linebacker that can get back to the quarterback as well. All of those guys I just mentioned have at least 4 sacks this season. So let's talk about some of the keys to the game, right? You just heard me say this is the Bobcat offense built on their running game. They cannot see that run game die. If that run game dies, or even if it struggles like it did against Miami in the first meeting, Ohio is going to struggle, and they may need to have Parker Navarro step up and make some really, really big throws. There are a lot of other guys in this wide receiver room that I should mention outside of Owen. Hendricks, Harris, both of those guys have at least 200 yards receiving on the season. Your tight end Williams can get involved here and there, but Parker Navarro is going to have to hit some shots to Coleman Owen here in this game. But this run game is the basis of this offense, and it cannot be slowed down as often as it was in the game in Oxford earlier this season. And I just mentioned it a little bit ago. Matt Salopek, Ty Wise, this secondary, and this entire defense as a whole can fly all over the field. They are going to make things really, really hard on the Bobcats. It's been a turnover-happy offense, 10 interceptions, 10 fumbles on the season. 11 interceptions and 9 fumbles on the season. I knew I was getting some numbers mixed up there. The offensive line has been pretty good. The third down offense has been pretty good. In fact, it went 50% against Miami the last time around, but this is the Miami defense that is flying and does fly all over the field. What does Ohio have to do offensively? Well, they got to be able to limit turnovers, and they have to control the clock a little bit better than they did in their last game. They held the ball for, I think, 30 minutes and 40 seconds, and this is an offense that when you're built on the ground game, you are also built on clock control. I think they got to keep this Miami offense off the field, but you have to limit the mistakes. Very, very few empty possessions where Miami is able to come away with a turnover at the end of it. Make Miami work for it. Make Miami slow you down on third down. That's going to be a big strength of this Bobcat team. Let's now introduce you to this Miami, Ohio Redhawk offense. They are led by one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the country in Brett Gabbert. 2,610 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions on the season for him. Again, you can see for both these quarterbacks, interceptions have been a little bit of a problem. And much like the Ohio offense, Miami has got a running back there as well. Keon Mosey's 1,000-yard rusher, has got 1,045 yards and 159 carries. That's right around 6.5 yards per carry. I think a little bit more than that. He's only got 4 rushing touchdowns on the season. This is the team that's only got 9 rushing touchdowns as a whole. They don't necessarily score a ton of points, but this is the Miami team that, again, built on their defense. Their defense is going to get a whole lot of stops. their offense has a tendency to pick up the slack here and there as well. Only 32 total touchdowns offensively. That's both passing and rushing throughout this team. But this is an offense that can capitalize when the moment shines bright, and it's very, very experienced. You want to talk about some of the receivers that Gabbert has? Good, because I do too. Virgil and Tracy. Those are the two big name targets out there in that wide receiver. And Reggie Virgil is a junior that has 787 yards, 9 touchdowns on the air, and he is a massive deep ball threat. Only 39 catches on the air, but he leads the team in receiving. Couple guys that have a little bit more volume. You just heard me mention Javon Tracy a little bit ago, 760 yards, 7 touchdowns on 50 catches. And right behind him is a guy, my apologies, by the name of Cade McDonald. A senior, has 47 catches for 589 yards and 3 touchdowns on the season as well. There is another running back there. You might see Brunson. You might see Davis. Those are a couple other guys, and Jordan Brunson, and I'll get the first name of Davis here in a second. I don't know why I'm blanking on it. Kevin Davis. There it is. You could see Kevin Davis catching some passes out of the backfield, but it's mainly those 3 wide receivers that I mentioned earlier for this Miami offense. The one thing, too, though, yes, that Brett Gabbert has been a little interception happy this season. This is a team that is not a great third down offense at all. Again, in the game against Ohio, they only went, I think I said 2 for 10 or something right around that number. This is a team that's not going to be super explosive on the ground, although Mosey can rip off big runs. They rely on Gabbert. They rely on these wide receivers to be able to help drive them down the field and be able to get into the end zone and score some points. Again, Mosey's been able to rip off a couple big runs this year, but Gabbert and this wide receiver room is the face of the offense. The offensive line, though, that's a big question for me in this game, especially when you consider that Ohio has got a lot of guys that can get after the quarterback. I'll list a couple names off of here for you, but this is the Bobcat team that's got a ton of great talent on the edge. A top 5 tackler on the team, great defensive end in Marcel Walker-Burgess. He's got 5 sacks this year, but the guy that leads the team in sacks is Bradley Weaver, and both of those guys are going to be trouble for this Miami offensive front. Again, Gabbert does lead a balanced attack that worked in its entirety against Ohio in the last game. Again, you heard me say they like to rely on Gabbert a little bit more than the run, but when you take a look at what Miami did in their previous game against Ohio, 178 yards passing and 150 yards rushing. They average 8.5 yards through the air and 5 yards on the ground. That's a great balanced attack, and if you throw balance at this Ohio Bobcat defense and it works again, then that's going to bode very, very well for Miami. For Ohio, let's look at what they were able to generate in terms of pressure in their previous game against this team. No sacks and only 3 tackles for loss. You got to ramp up that pressure. More negative plays are absolutely crucial to slowing down this team and slowing this game down, but the battle on third downs is going to be extremely key on this side of the ball, because if Ohio can get back to what it has done most of this season and limit Miami's rushing attack better than it was able to do in their previous matchup, and they win that battle on third down, they get Miami off the field, the Bobcats are going to be into this thing, man. I see this being a low-scoring defensive game. You see there, all lines and odds as of recording this video, Miami is the slight favorites here in this game. I think this is going to be an absolute dogfight. I see this one going back and forth, but defensively going back and forth. It's not going to be going back and forth with points. It's not going to be points scored here, points scored there. No, it's going to be defensive stop, defensive stop, defensive stop, and someone has got to be able to make plays to be able to overcome that. I trust the experience of Brett Gabbert. I like the weapons that Gabbert has around him a little bit better than what Navarro has around Ohio, but at the end of the day, in a defensive brawl, which defense do I trust more? That's going to be the defense that I said flies all over the field. Matt Salopek, Ty Wise, this extremely talented defensive backfield, and I think Miami, Ohio will repeat as MAC champions in a 17-14 defensive showdown. I think this is going to be an exceptional game to watch. Let me know what you guys think about this one in the comment section down below. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder. We got one more left. It's on to the Sun Belt Conference. Goodbye.